Welcome to the Hindu Temple and Heritage Hall of Toledo. Our temple is trying to utilize their valuable resources and that helps us to share the wisdom with our devotees. We have started 5 series talk on Hinduism and neuroscience. Dr. Rajiv Parinjaji has done an excellent job in giving these nice presentations in the previous 4. Today, as far as spirituality is concerned, no matter how well achieved you are, but in order to bring the balance in our daily life, spirituality plays a key role or roles in our lives. And why spirituality is important, what is the role of the spirituality in our lives, and how it works. Dr. Rajiv Parinjaji, based on his scientific facts of more than 2 decades of his experience on a daily basis with all the different kinds of patients, he is going to share with us. Over and above, he himself is spiritually inclined, so he will also add his personal flavor of spirituality in his concluding presentation on Hinduism and neuroscience. Without further ado, I invite Dr. Rajiv Parinjaji to please come here and present his concluding presentation on Hinduism. Thank you, Rajiv Parinjaji. Hari Om.
Thank you, Panditji. So we have been talking about Hinduism, we've been talking about neuroscience. This is the 5th talk. I will just briefly recap what we have done so far. So the first talk was an introductory talk in which we looked at the challenge of spiritual progress. We talked about why it is difficult to teach, difficult to define, because normally the things that we understand are based on words for which we have a common understanding. So for example, if I tell you about orange juice, you know exactly what I mean because you have seen it, tasted it, experienced it several times before. But when we talk about spiritual progress and leading up to moksha, there are no words. It is not a common experience. So it is difficult to comprehend and to learn about it. The scriptures have used stories. They have given instructions about what to do, but it still remains out of grasp for a lot of us. You can go so far, and after that you hope that you will get the kripa of God and be able to make further progress. Now, in my mind, another reason that it is so difficult is that our brains work in a particular way which get in the way of us paying attention to spiritual progress, which is why in the second talk we looked at the brain in terms of neural pathways. We looked at the reward system, emotions, habits, self-regulation, unconscious, trying to understand what does the brain normally do. In the third talk, we talk about emotions and how emotions affect our thinking, our memory, our action tendencies, because the emotional brain is, in my mind, the main impediment that gets in the way of making spiritual progress. In the fourth talk, we talked about communication, because when we are not able to successfully communicate, that is distressing. Your relationships are often the commonest cause of distress, be it relationships at work, at home, in your family, in your neighborhood. And if we can effectively communicate, we can decrease that distress. This today is the last talk in which I will try and define spirituality. I'll talk about why you really want to pursue spirituality, and I'll talk about how to do it. So let's start with the why. Why would you want to pursue spirituality? So spirituality has now been investigated by science for the last 2 to 3 decades, and there are all kinds of studies which show that different spiritual practices, and I'm being general because the studies are sometimes studying maybe pranayama, some of them are studying meditation, some of them are studying people who have had a lot of experience with meditation. But in general, I think it is fair to say that practicing spirituality improves mental health. You have less anxiety, less depression, less distress. It reduces inflammation. It improves your life expectancy. People who are pursuing this live longer. It improves your physical health. And more specifically, you can measure things which get better. So one of the things that determines our biological age is something called a telomere, which is the tail end of the chromosome. As we grow older, the telomeres get shorter. If you are not a human being, then that rate of decrease will be different. So for example, dogs will shorten their telomeres much quicker than human beings. Parrots will do it slower. So when people start meditation, you can see their telomeres, and the length actually stops decreasing at the rate that it was. And for some people, it will actually increase. So your biological age is less, you're younger biologically. Many markers of inflammation go down. People's blood pressure improves, the lipid profile improves, and many measures of oxidative stress, which also is associated with aging, those go down. Now, these are, of course, important and relevant. In fact, if I could produce a cream which would make people younger, and I could prove it, that would fly off the shelves and probably make millions and possibly billions of dollars. This happened in England when BBC did a study on a cream which made people look younger, and there were queues forming outside the stores where that cream was being sold. But if you say that spirituality will do it, then you don't necessarily get that big a following. But let's go beyond this. In Hinduism, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 2nd chapter, 40th shlok, this is the promise that Arjuna gets from Krishna, and this is, so the shloka reads, Neha vikrama nasho sti pratyavayo na vidyate swalpam apasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhaya. A simple translation is, he's talking about yoga. So he says in yoga, there is no loss, no adverse results, and even a little effort will save you from the great danger of the things that you fear. So it's a big promise. And I come back to this graph, and this I think is, in my mind, the main reason why spirituality is so important. This is from an article on addiction in '97 in the Science Journal. And we have looked at it before, but let's revisit it and see how, if you get something that helps you feel good, especially if it's something that takes you beyond your average experience of feeling good. So if you had something good for breakfast, you will be happy and you will return to normal. That's normal. If you met a friend, you will feel a little happier than your baseline. You will return to normal. But if you do something which is beyond that, which gets you feeling really high, and if you look here, it's not very strong, but if you look on the figure A, you go up, and then eventually you drop down into a process B. If you have never experienced this before, for example, if people are taking a drug, they might, in the figure B, get a higher high for a couple of times. But if you keep doing that, what actually happens is that your baseline, which is a 0, resets downwards. So you no longer feel normal in the way that you did before you had that experience. This, of course, happens with drugs. And this can be a permanent settlement down to a lower level, even if you stop using drugs. Now, keeping this graph in mind, I will just, this is just a hand-drawn graph of how we are feeling. So right at the beginning, not picking up. But if you look at the beginning, this is your baseline. This is how you wake up on a normal morning. You wake up, and maybe, depending on the kind of personality you have, you might have a genetic set point, and maybe you feel a 5 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10. And that's how you wake up feeling every morning. If you are anticipating something really good, you might end up feeling a little bit higher. You are planning a vacation, you are going somewhere nice. If you have had an adverse event, you might end up feeling a little bit lower, a 3 or a 4. And your life goes, you go up and down, but your baseline never changes. If you have a particularly good thing happen in your life, maybe you got a big promotion that you had not really expected. Well, then you will have this movement upwards and you will feel quite good. But eventually, you will begin to come down and you might settle at the baseline, or actually, if it's a big high, you will go below it. You will feel a little empty. You will feel that, something is not right. I mean, this promotion was awesome. Everything was going to get fixed, but it didn't. And eventually, you will return back to the baseline. Everything we pursue in life, we do in the hope that this baseline will go up, that we will feel better for a sustained period, but it doesn't happen. The only thing that you can do that will actually make this baseline trend upwards is to pursue spirituality if you are in good physical and mental health.
This is a big question. So why does that happen? Like, what is going on in your brain? Like when you get a promotion, you feel good for some, and then you drop below the baseline. So what is happening at that biological level in your mind that causes that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a certain chemical level of dopamine, but there are other chemicals that are sitting there. If you increase that chemical, then you will get a high, which is the expected result. But over time, what happens is that the receptors, they get decreased in number. They also become less sensitive, and there is a compensation. Now, this is the nature of physiology. This is also the nature of equilibrium. If you think about the equilibrium, and I don't remember the chemistry rules, but you have an equilibrium, you push the equilibrium, you will make it change, and the equilibrium will fight back to reduce the effect of that change. You can see this happening not just with reward. This happens with blood pressure. You start with blood pressure medication, you will have a drop, and eventually maybe a little bit of a rise. Not back to the baseline, but it will not be at the biggest drop. So you acclimatize to that. So that is just how the brain works. This is the physiology. But we are designed to believe that what we feel is going to last forever. So we keep pursuing it. We want more and more of it. And then we need more to have the same effect. The same thing doesn't do it. I think the first talk what we discussed was, like, let's say the guy gets a new job in which he's a server in a restaurant, he's getting $100 in tips. The first night he's like, my God, this is awesome, I'm getting $100 in tips every night. Second night, third night, fourth night, 30th night, he's like, yeah, $100. So you acclimatize to it, and your baseline returns to the same. The only thing that will actually improve your baseline, that you wake up in the morning and your quality of life feels different, is spiritual pursuit and practice, in my mind. So spirituality is challenging to define, and one of the problems is that as you begin to pursue spirituality, what comes out of groups who are pursuing religion is that there are traps. And I'll just touch on it because I think before we define what is spirituality, which is hard, it is important to say what it is not. So when you follow a religion and it makes you angry, fearful, resentful, or vengeful, then you're definitely not moving towards spirituality, you're moving away from it. And in Hinduism, the two terms that are called gunas, that are, which take us away from spirituality, are rajas and tamas. You might have heard of rajasic and tamasic. Rajas is passion, it makes you emotionally aroused. And tamas is literally means darkness. It's like, I think the equivalent word would be evil. And the one gun that takes us towards spirituality is sattva, and the things that take us there are sattvic, that's goodness. So sattva takes us towards spirituality, but it's not the end in itself. Doing sattvic things will help you move in that direction, but it doesn't mean that you will find moksha just by doing that. But you have to get away from the things that pull you away from spirituality and go toward the things that take you closer. So avoid rajasic and tamasic and go towards sattvic. And there are examples of this. So if you go to chapter 17 in the Bhagavad Gita, Shri Krishna gives some examples, and I'm just taking one example. So he says, if you're giving a gift to somebody, when you're giving a gift to somebody without the expectation of return, when you're doing it in service of that person, and when you're doing this appropriately, respectfully, then what you're doing is sattvic. But when the gift is given with an end in mind, you say, let me give him a gift and maybe I'll get something in return, that's rajasic. That's still not terrible. But when you're giving a gift to somebody to belittle them with contempt, then that is tamasic. And this kind of division you can look at in many different aspects of your life. And now I'm going to move towards this very interesting study, which kind of tells us a little bit about ourselves. So there was this Monopoly game in which they recruited people. Thank you. And you would rank, depending on which side you went on, you could end up on one side which had the regular amount of money, and you did your you rolled your dice regularly, or in the other condition, you got twice the amount of money, you got twice the amount of moves, and you also got twice the amount of money every time you passed the cards. So obviously this game is heavily rigged, and it is inevitable that the person who has twice the number of moves, twice the amount of money is going to win the game. That is expected. But the interesting thing was that when they asked the people who had won the game what was the reason that they won, they said, it was because I had better strategy. It was because I am just a better player. And not only that, the winners became louder as they kept winning. And they even started moving the losing person's pieces for them pretty loudly. This kind of implies that even when there is no logical reason for our success in terms of what we've done, we like to take credit for it. We become full of ourselves. And we lose perspective of the big picture. That's just who we are. That's our design. And what spirituality does is it takes us away from this tendency towards egotism, where the ahankar, me, ahamkar, my form, becomes bigger and bigger and bigger in a way that is not based in reality. There is no truth to it. The reason the Monopoly study guys won was because the game was rigged in their favor by design. That was the reason, not their special skills. So we are designed to take credit for things that we logically cannot take credit for. And we use every opportunity to grow our ego in ways that are not based in truth and often cause harm to ourselves and to others. And this is Maya. This is what pulls us in this direction. And spirituality is the opposite of that. It is counterintuitive. So this is just my depiction of spirituality. My natural tendency is to become bigger and bigger and be very invested in my concerns, my agenda, what I want done, my tribe, my group of people, my religion. And the emotions associated with that are pride, arrogance, and an illogical belief in my ability and the contribution that I make to the world. And I feel that people don't pay attention to how much good I do for the world. But when I look at the reality, and I move towards spirituality, it changes. I see myself as who I am. My issues, my agenda, my concern, my tribe are a small part of the big picture, which is very large. I mean, you can look at it in many ways. We have, as a species, walked on this planet for between 200 and 300,000 years. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. What's the longest somebody can live for? A little over 100 years. And we are here and we are gone. If you look at the time span in a blink of an eye, and we think that we are going to make some big difference. You can also look at it from just the size of the number of people that there are on the planet, the size of the planet. We are a small part on this planet, which is a small part of this universe. And when you look at things in this way, your emotions will change from pride, arrogance to humility, gratitude, and compassion. These are not emotions which we necessarily want to get, but they feel pretty good if you have them. Now, the question is, how do we move towards spirituality? What can we do that will get us there? So I have some simple suggestions. The first one is very simple. You can do jap or do mantram ucharan or saying a mantram. And if you want it, it's very simple. You use a mantram, sometimes you get it from a guru, you repeat it. This has been studied. Your brain actually changes. You are less anxious, less distressed if you do mantram. Yes.
So, and this is really good suggestion. The question I have is, let's say we do Gita chanting, right?
Yeah.
But will it still help me move towards spirituality even if I don't understand the meanings of all the shlokas? I just chant every single day the shlokas, really get into it. But let's say if I don't understand the meanings of those, will it still help me to?
That is a very specific question, and I don't know the answer to that. But what I will venture to say is that it will help you in certain ways. So what they have done is, like, the people who are pundits and they are reciting a large number of complex scriptures which are in a difficult language from the language that is their spoken language. They have a change in their brain. The memory centers of their brain actually become larger. So there's something happening there which may be helpful from a spiritual standpoint as well, but I don't know if specifically it will be. The idea of the scriptures is, in my mind, not to learn them, not to recite them in that manner, but to get from those words a certain understanding of truth, a change in our consciousness, which is moving towards the spiritual consciousness. And I generally read in English because that is easier for me to understand than Sanskrit. And sometimes you get it, so you can read the same scripture again and again. You can read different scriptures, you will get it sometimes you will not get it. But you have to keep trying and moving towards the things from which you get a change in that consciousness. You can have a guru who can help you with those practices and help change that consciousness. And of course, meditation can change that consciousness. Now, mantra ucharan will change that. And mantra ucharan has been studied in brain scans. And the people who are doing mantra ucharan will have more resilience, they will be less upset, and it does change the brain. And it's quite easy. Now, there was a very recent study on pranayama, but pranayama are breathing exercises. You take control of your breathing, and now they have studied it in many different ways, like how does it work if you breathe in slowly and breathe out faster, or the other way around. Pranayama itself will change your consciousness. It does it in a way, in one study at least, it worked better than meditation. But of course, pranayama is easy to do because the instructions are very simple. It improves your mental health, happiness, and I believe spirituality. Now, meditation is a little more complex because there are many different kinds, and it is also, difficult to study because people have different levels of training, experience. What happens if you start somebody who is not really interested in how it works versus somebody who's got like 20 years of experience? But we'll discuss how we do it. And So in pursuing spirituality, I think reading scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads are a good place to start. But the Hindu scriptural, the number of books is very large. And once you've done these, you can go to others, which may be less accessible if you start with them. And I think about Yoga Vasisht as one of those sort of scriptures which is quite inaccessible if you start there. So I'm going to now define what meditative practice is. If you're going to do meditation, what exactly are you looking at? How would you go about it, and how would you know that you're doing the right thing? So I take this from a guy called John Kabat-Zinn, who is actually a Buddhist monk, and he, in the 70s or 80s, popularized mindfulness in US. He was at the University of Massachusetts. I don't know if he's still there. But he gave what in my mind is the simplest definition. So he says mindfulness is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. One sentence. But let's break it down. So you have to pay attention. That's the first thing. The attention has to be purposeful. It has to be not about, you can't be dreaming about the future. You can't be ruminating about the past. It has to be in the present moment. And you can't be feeling anything too strong one way or the other. It has to be non-judgmental. So if you, for example, watch a very interesting thriller movie and you pay attention for 2 hours, can you say I was mindful for 2 hours? Not really, because it's pulling your attention. You have to be paying attention, so there has to be a slight component of effort to paying that attention. And we have talked about this story before, but I'll go with it again. So there was this monk, a sadhu, in ancient India. He was meditating for many years outside a village. He was, sometimes people would come to him for guidance. People who had already done a lot of spiritual practices would come to him for advice. And in that village there was a cowherd, a young boy who was just herding his cows. And he turned up one day and said, I've heard a lot about you and I just need your help to find God. And the sadhu says to him, you are very young, you are just a cowherd, go away, this is not for you. You have to do a lot of work, read a lot of scripture, go away. The next day the cowherd turns up again. So the sadhu sends him back. And this happened a few times. And the sadhu was frustrated. He said, this is not working. How do I make this guy go away? So he says, if you want to find God, just follow your cow and pay attention to your cow, because the cow is your God. And then you will find God. So the cowherd goes away. And a couple of months later he comes back. And he says, Maharaj, you truly are a great teacher. I had not believed that this instruction would work, but I did exactly as you said, and I became enlightened. After paying attention to the cow and worshipping the cow as my God, my consciousness changed and merged with the Supreme Consciousness. I realized that I and the cow and you are not any different. And now I am enlightened. So the story here being that if you are paying sustained attention, the fact of just paying attention on a sustained basis itself would alter your consciousness in that way. So we talked about this a little bit before, but you have to pay attention on purpose. And the ability to pay attention is something that is a learned skill. And it can be very frustrating when you start it. And my analogy for that is if you have a child that you have ever taught cycling, when they start on the bicycle, it is impossible for them to imagine that they will ever be able to ride the bicycle. Because they fall, every time you start, you fall. You start meditating, you pay attention, your attention wanders. You start meditating, attention wanders. It seems impossible that you would ever get to a point where you will be able to pay attention on a sustained basis. But it comes. Anything that draws your attention, and holds it, doesn't really count. The effortfulness decreases, and once you are actually established and you're able to pay attention, you will have to still vary the techniques because it becomes habitual and you can actually pay attention almost out of habit. So you still have to have a component of effortfulness in meditation. So talking a little bit about non-judgment. Non-judgment is that when you remember things, yeah.
So can you elaborate on that last point you said, once you establish that, once you get habituated to paying attention to the purpose or the current, you still need to do what?
You may have to vary the technique a little bit. So you might have to do if you are doing always doing a mantra, you can just keep doing the mantra and your mind will begin to wander even when you're doing the mantra. So the mantra becomes, you're doing the mantra, it's habitual. And it's just happening by itself and no great benefit is coming because it's no longer effortful. So then you're going to have to vary your meditative practices a little bit. So non-judgment is important because our brain automatically produces should've and what-if responses. So when you think about something, you think, oh, this should not have happened, this should have happened, he should have done this, he should not have done this. And then when you're anticipating the future, it is like, what if I fail my exam? What if I get fired from my job? What if this happens or that happens? And the should have responses are illogical because a should have response would only work if you could travel back in time and change things. What has happened has happened. We're going to have to come to terms with it. So our emotional responses are more likely to arise when we have an expectation of someone or something, and the people are going to do what they do and they have already done what they have done. And though that emotional response arises, in the time that we are meditating, we want to be non-judgmental and not really have a response to that. Now, that is easier said than done. So, if you are not able to do it, that's okay too. You don't want to blame yourself for not being able to do it because that is another level of I should have been able to not be upset when this guy did this. No, you're going to be upset and that's okay. So in non-judgment, we are able to deal with somebody without being emotionally distressed. And essentially what we are doing is we are processing from our frontal lobe, the frontal part of our brain, we are using logic to regulate the emotional arousal that is happening. And when we do all of this, we come to a state of acceptance. And acceptance is an awareness of a situation without the negative emotional reaction that normally would have come from it or that may have come from it earlier. And it is hard, and you can get into an emotional reaction to the inability to have acceptance. And if you can't have acceptance, that's okay. You can accept that you can't accept. Don't reject your inability to accept. You can't rush acceptance. And after practicing this for some time, when things go wrong, I'm like, I should be good at this. I've been teaching this. I should not be upset. No, it doesn't work like that. It's going to take the time it takes to come to acceptance. Acceptance is not permanent. It may come and go. That is normal, and you accept it. So you have to accept that you cannot accept some things, and you humbly submit that, with the help of God's blessings, acceptance will come over time. And this is just an acceptance story which we have done before, but we'll do it again. So there are three monks, three sadhus who are meditating in ancient India, and they're meditating for many, many years. They have developed a lot of skill, and they're close to enlightenment. They just don't know how long it's going to take. And then one day, one of them gets enlightened. So he's very happy, and he goes to his friends and says, I reached that point of moksha, I'm enlightened. And his friends are happy for him, but they're like, oh my God, you have a connection with God, and we've been working so long, and we would like to know how much more time we have to do this before we also become enlightened. So the first of them, he asks God and tells him, you have got 2 more years of meditating, and then you'll be enlightened. So this guy's upset. He says, 2 more years? I thought I was almost there. so he goes to the second guy, and the second guy, he says, you've got 2 more lifetimes of meditating before you become enlightened. And the second guy says, oh, that is so great, that's, God is so kind. I'm very grateful to him that I only need 2 more lifetimes. And he instantly becomes enlightened. Because a complete acceptance is enlightenment. When you are in a state of complete acceptance, you're enlightened. So, just another illustrative story. So this is just, in my mind, how do you get to that state? So there are certain emotions which take you closer to acceptance, and certain emotions that take you away. The emotions that you want to find that get you closer to that point are gratitude, compassion, and humility. And humility ultimately, if you're going to be in a state where the ahankar is gone, that means your ego has dissolved, you are not going to get there from a place of pride. You're going to have to move from pride to humility. It is when you are in humility that you will reach ego dissolution. And I want to emphasize that in our scriptural kind of knowledge, these emotions cease to exist when you are in a state close to enlightenment or a deep meditative state. Because if everything is as it should be, then even feeling grateful doesn't make sense. So coming to the techniques, and if you want to read a little bit more about the techniques, there's many ideas, and people have used apps, people have used YouTube videos, whatever works to start out is good. I have taken this from chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita, in which Sri Krishna says that you sit on the floor in an asana, your head is pulled back and your neck is straight. In a different chapter he said you pay attention to your breathing, and in the scientific studies we know that if you are breathing in a purposeful manner, in a slow, deep and rhythmic manner, that helps. You take the attention as you breathe to your inner self. It goes inwards. Your mind will wander, and that's okay. When you notice that it has wandered off, you gently bring it back. You don't get upset with yourself that my mind wandered. It will. With practice, and the practice will be many days to many weeks, the mind will wander less. There are times as well, they say that it's better to meditate in the morning and in the evening than in the afternoons. As you do this, you will get something called the overview effect, which has also been studied by science. It was studied in astronauts who were circling the space station, and when they look at Earth from that distance, they have a feeling of awe, of wonder. And also, they see themselves as a small part of a big picture. So the overview effect changes the perspective. You get a sense of the big picture. You feel you and your issues are less important, and it leads to a kind of ego dissolution. And if you wanted to experience this through scripture, I would recommend that you read chapters 9 and 10 of the Bhagavad Gita, in which Sri Krishna shows Arjuna not his human form, but his form in which the whole universe is within him, and how Arjuna sees the dynamic where everything is essentially coming out of God and going back into God. If you have never tried meditation before, it can be quite hard, and to simplify it, I have some suggestions. You can start by paying attention to a simple task that you're working on. So what I sometimes tell patients who are interested in this to do is that you will sit, but you'll imagine yourself walking slowly, maybe through the entrance of your workplace to the place where you work. And so you have to make an effort. You are paying attention, but you're walking one step, maybe taking the stairs, maybe taking the elevator, gradually finding the way to where you sit. It is a little easier to do because there's something next that you have to pay attention to. You can do that in your mind, and you can do that for your home. You can also sit on the floor upright and breathe regularly for 2 minutes at a time. That itself will change slightly your consciousness and make it easier to meditate. If you have never meditated before, you might want to start out with no more than 10 minutes at a time, because if you do more, you will feel frustrated, which might make you not want to try it again. So I think starting out with 10 minutes at a time is a good place to start at. It's not too much. So, we've talked about spirituality, we've talked about why to do it, how it is so beneficial. Then the question must be asked, people know about it. Why isn't everybody practicing it? And this is actually an old problem. The Bhagavad Gita defines it, and in chapter 7, Shlok 3, Shri Krishna tells Arjuna, of many thousand mortals, one perchance strives for the truth, and of those few that strive and rise high, one only here and there knows me as I am, the very truth. So it's not a new problem, it was there at that time too. People were not practicing, the ones who were practicing were not getting there, which we know because it's challenging. But why don't more people practice it? That is because we don't want to. What we want is something different. Our reward system makes us want things that enhance our ego as a priority over spiritual practices. We want to pursue pleasure, wealth, fame, and power because they give us that instant high, and then of course we go back to normal. And I do this test with people. I say, okay, for a moment, go back to a time, maybe when you were, in your teens, and you had some completely out of the world dream. Maybe you wanted to be the next Bill Gates or the next Taylor Swift, or something you wanted to be the next president. And for a moment, imagine that you got it. What would you feel? Well, you would feel peace. I am there. I'd feel awesome. I'd feel wonderful. I'll also feel completely steady, at peace, and also humble. Look at what I've achieved. Unfortunately, pursuing those things, even if you find success in them, will not get you there. But spiritual practices will, and that's counterintuitive, and that is kind of the play here. It's the challenge that God gives you. The things that you want will take you in one place, but not get you what you really want. What you really want happens in a very different path. So how do you know that when you're practicing spirituality, you are on the right track? Even if you find success in practicing spirituality, there will be challenges and you will be easily led astray into different pathways where the progress stops. A description, if you wanted to read one, is, so in chapter 2, verse 54, Arjuna asks, O Keshav, what is the disposition of one who is situated in divine consciousness? How does an enlightened person talk? How does he sit? How does he walk? And from 55 to 72, Sri Krishna describes this. And he described this at many other places in the Bhagavad Gita. But to the emotions that you will experience are peace, serenity, and equanimity. That means that you don't change when things happen, good or bad. Your passions are not easily aroused by what is happening in the world around you. And in one description he says, you are like the ocean that receives many rivers, but it doesn't rise because it's receiving those rivers. And once you start the practice, it may not be a straight path. You will almost inevitably, if you get past the first couple of weeks, find success. You will feel better. But very often, I think the same adaptive principles that we kind of try to talk about of the brain come in, and then it's hard. And Swami Vivekananda had this thing where he said, it takes 10 to 15 years of meditation after you've had that success to actually come to a state of sustained enlightenment, where you are constantly in a meditative state. And there's one of the psychiatrists I worked with, who was very advanced in his own spiritual practice, used to tell this joke. So there was this new monk who was meditating, and he was meditating, and then he ran to his master and said, "Master, I can see the Buddha in my meditation. He's there. I found him." And the master says to him, "That's okay. Keep meditating. He will go away." So the early success, you have to keep at it afterwards to get it more durable. And the main challenge is that Maya, the world as we see it, gets in the way. We will be tempted by tamas. There will be. It's based on lies, and I use the word lies a little loosely here because some of those things may seem very true, but from a spiritual standpoint, there isn't a lot of validity to them. But when you are sucked into the Maya, one of the things you will feel is a lack of compassion towards people. It may be a specific group of people, but a lack of compassion and dislike that tells you that you are out of the zone. And some of the clues that you are tempted by Maya comes when you are sucked into a narrative. So the narrative of Maya, the narrative of tamas, actually, in my mind, interestingly, comes from places of power, and it comes from places of worship. So you come out of temples, churches, and mosques sometimes, and it makes you feel fear, anger, resentment, and also pride in your group. You move from a certain fluidity to a rigidity. You move from a grayness to a black and white quality. It's very subtle, but you have to pay attention to it, and when you're getting sucked into it, you know that you're moving away from spirituality. So before I sort of conclude, I just wanted to share another interesting fact. So, if you look at politics and elections and things like that, what is the most important thing for people for the next government? It's usually the economy. The economy has to do better. Because individually, we think we want more money. Now, how is the US economy doing today compared to 1950? Well, we are 3 times bigger. After taking into account inflation, after adjusting for inflation, we are 3 times as big. But are we happier? Are we feeling any better about ourselves? No. So that is the individual desire for more money translated into a larger context of the country as a whole. The same thing. You want more, you can have it, doesn't make a difference. You're still at the same baseline, sometimes lower. So to end it, I'll just summarize. In my mind, the only way to improve the quality of your day-to-day experience if you are already in good physical and mental health. Because if you're not in good physical and mental health, then working on those will actually improve your day-to-day lived experience. But if you're already there, then the only thing that will do it is a pursuit of spirituality. You can get started with pranayama meditation. You have to give it time. And you must resist the temptations of Maya, which will always be there. Thank you.